Բարև ձեզ հարգելի գործընկերներ եւ առցանց հետևորդներ, այսօր մեդիա կենտրոնը կանցկացնի առցանց հարցազրույց ժողովրդավարական ինտեգրացիա կենտրոնի տնօրեն, ժողովրդավարական ընտրությունների եվրոպական պլատֆորմի փորձագետ եւ Շվեդիայի միջազգային հարցերի ինստիտուտի հետազոտող Անտոն Շեխովցովի հետ, Ռուսաստանը, Ուկրաինան եւ արևմտյան ծայրահեղ աջերը թեմայով։ Բարև ձեզ պարոն Շեխովցով, շնորհակալություն մեդիա կենտրոնի հրավերն ընդունելու համար։ Ես տեղեկացնեմ, որ Անտոն Շեխովցովի փորձագիտական հիմնական ուղղությունը եվրոպական ծայրահեղ աջերի խմբերն են, եվրոպայում ռուսական բացասական ազդեցությունը եւ կենտրոնական ու արևելյան Եվրոպայի ոչ լիբերալ միտումները։ Շնորհակալություն, ես կրկնեմ հարցը, թե ներողություն եմ խնդրում տեխնիկական խնդրի համար, ես կրկին ներկայացնեմ, որ մեդիա կենտրոնը այսօր կանցկացնի առցանց հարցազրույց ժողովրդավարական ինտեգրացիա կենտրոնի տնօրեն, ժողովրդավարական ընտրությունների եվրոպական պլատֆորմի փորձագետ եւ Շվեդիայի միջազգային հարցերի ինստիտուտի հետազոտող Անտոն Շեխովցովի հետ, Ռուսաստանը, Ուկրաինան եւ արևմտյան ծայրահեղ աջերը թեմայով։ Բարև ձեզ, պարոն Շեխովցով։ Շնորհակալ եմ մեդիա կենտրոնի հրավերն ընդունելու համար։
Good day and thank you for the invite.
Ես մեր դեսանի համար տեղեկացնեմ, որ Անտոն Շեխովցովի փորձագիտական հիմնական ուղղությունը եվրոպական ծայրահեղ աջերի խմբերն են, Եվրոպայում ռուսական բացասական ազդեցությունը եւ կենտրոնական ու արևելյան Եվրոպայի ոչ լիբերալ միտումները։ Եվ առաջին հարցը, պարոն Շեխովցով, դուք երկար տարիներ ուսումնասիրում եք եվրոպական ծայրահեղ աջ շարժումները, ուսումնասիրում եք նրանց միջազգային կապերը։ Ռուսալեզու նոր ծայրահեղ աջերը եվրոպական ժողովրդավարություններում եւ Ռուսաստանը ու արևմտյան ծայրահեղ աջերը գրքերի հեղինակն եք։ Հետաքրքիր է ձեր ուսումնասիրությունները ինչ են ցույց տալիս վերջին տասնամյակում, ինչ եք կարծում մեծացել է ծայրահեղ աջ ուժերի ազդեցությունը ժողովրդավարական պետություններում եւ ինչ վտանգ են ներկայացնում դրանք այսօր, ինչ նոր ռիսկեր են առաջացնում, խնդրեմ։
Well, let me first start with saying that Russia, of course, currently tries to influence the far right in Europe. It was not the case for all the time after the demise of the Soviet Union, and Russia only recently, or comparatively recently, started building those connections with the European far right. And the main reason why it is doing so since, I would say, 2012, 2013, is because Russia is losing mainstream support in the West. It's losing mainstream support among, moderate politicians, especially those who are in power. This is not the case for all the European nations, but it's the case for, I would say, the general picture in the EU. And Russia is doing, or Russia is reaching out to the European far right for many reasons. Some reasons are connected to the media, because Russia needs to show to its own citizens, to its own domestic audience, that Russia is not isolated. And while it would be very difficult to hear these ideas from mainstream politicians, the far-right politicians would be ready to do this, and they would support Russia's actions abroad. It will support even some domestic policies in Russia that the mainstream politicians would probably find problematic. But for the far right, it's no problem to support Russia here. But of course, Russia is also using the European far right to advance its particular political narratives in Europe. It would talk to these people, to European far right politicians, and then the European far right politicians would be repeating the same narratives, the same ideas in their own national contexts. And this is important because if you, for example, if you live in Italy or if you live in Austria and you would hear something said by Russian politicians, by the Russian leadership concerning the international relations, you would probably not take these ideas, take those narratives seriously, because, well, it's coming from abroad. Yeah, it's coming from another country. Why should we be interested in those foreign interpretations of what is going on in our country or in the EU? But when you hear these from local politicians, then it makes much more sense, and the same ideas would be, the same messages would be taken much more seriously than those coming from abroad.
Շնորհակալ եմ, իսկ հետաքրքիր է, երբ սկսվեց Ռուսաստանի, այսպես ասած, սիրախաղը եվրոպական ծայրահեղ աջերի հետ, եւ Ռուսաստանում ովքեր են սերտ կապեր պահպանում նրանց հետ։ Դուք նշեցիք պատճառները, նպատակները, այդուհանդերձ կարող ենք նշել ովքեր են սերտ կապեր պահպանում եւ ովքեր են հենց նրանք Կրեմլի ծայրահեղ աջընկերները Եվրոպայում։
Well, it all started, of course, when we are talking about just various Russian politicians who are not necessarily part of the elites. Those contacts with the European far right, they already started in the 90s. For example, Vladimir Zhirinovsky was one of the more significant Russian politicians who built contacts with the European far right. Alexander Dugin also participated in building those networks. However, those politicians, they were never part of a real elite in Russia. And when we are talking about, for example, the United Russia Party, or when we're talking about the Russian parliament, these contacts, these particular specific contacts with the European far right started around 2012, 2013. And in Eastern Europe, of course, it's quite difficult for Russia to have contacts with the European far right for many reasons. And one of those reasons are historical reasons. And I'm talking about the European Union at the moment. Because if you look at countries such as Poland, such as Romania, or well, it's not Eastern Europe, but Northern Europe, the Baltic states, for historical reasons, people are quite cautious about Russia. They're quite skeptical about Russia. So far-right parties in those countries would probably not be so much interested in cooperating with Russian politicians. However, if we look further to the West, we will see that parties such as in France, that would be National Rally, party of Marine Le Pen. We will see that in Austria, the Freedom Party of Austria, in Italy, the Lega party, in Belgium, that would be Flemish Interest, and some other parties. We will see that they are more or less can be described as pro-Kremlin parties, as parties that are supportive of or promoting even geopolitical interests of the Russian Federation. Then we have countries such as Hungary, where we see that the authoritarian leader, Viktor Orban, is on good terms with the Russian Federation. It's not to say that he is following what Russia is telling him to do. He is quite independent, but at the same time, because he is in conflict, he himself is in conflict with Brussels, with the EU leadership, it makes him a practical ally of Putin's regime. So in general, this is the picture. In Scandinavia, for example, far-right parties are quite ambivalent towards Russia, and again for historical reasons, but also for the reasons that in Scandinavia they have a political culture that is very strongly opposed to even the idea of corruption. And because Russian connections with the far right, they very often include this corrupt element. So even far-right parties in Scandinavia don't want to get involved in something that can damage their reputation in their own societies.
Պարոն Շախովցով, այդուհանդերձ ով է իրականում միմյանցից օգնություն, աջակցություն փնտրում։ Ռուսաստանը եվրոպական աճ ծայրահեղականներից թե հակառակը, թեև դուք նաև նշեցիք, հա, յուրաքանչյուրն ունի իր շահերը։
I think that both parties are benefiting from their cooperation. Russia gives media platform for the European far right, using its resources such as RT or Sputnik News and some other resources. They give them media platform, they give them media visibility that they lack in their own countries. In their own countries, the mainstream media, which is, of course, considered to be an enemy of illiberal politicians, mainstream media, much demonized, they are, well, quite critical of the European far right. So the European far right in Italy, in France, in Austria, in other countries, in Spain, they cannot get this, sort of positive picture, positive interpretations of them in their own national mainstream media. But Russians can do this. They can give this positive view on them. And this is very useful for the European far right that are usually indeed they lack these media visibility or positive media visibility in their own homes. On the other hand, Russia, what it receives not in exchange, but in its own turn from the European far right, is that the European far right are pushing useful narratives for the Kremlin in the European Union. They are the European far right sometimes function as an extension of the Kremlin propaganda machine. Sometimes European far right parties also receive political support. Like, for example, in 2017, you may know that Marine Le Pen, just 1 month before the first round of the presidential elections in France, she went to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. And that was, of course, a very clear message of political support that, just 1 month before the presidential elections, that was a clear message that Marine Le Pen was the Kremlin's candidate, or at least the candidate who the Kremlin supported in those presidential elections against Emmanuel Macron. And basically this is the most difficult part, because we also know that in some cases there is financial support involved. But unfortunately, we don't know, and by we I'm saying experts who are dealing with this sort of research, we don't have many proven cases of where we could say, well, here there was this financial support coming from Russia to the European far right parties or politicians, but real evidence that we can build our arguments on.
Պարոն Շախովցով, դուք նշեցիք, որ լրատվամիջոցներն են հիմնականում որպես միջոց օգտագործվում։ Եթե հանցնենք դավադրության տեսություններին, ինչ տեղ են գրավում դավադրության տեսությունները Ռուսաստան, Ուկրաինա, եվրոպական աճեր այս համագործակցությունում, եւ հետաքրքիր է մասնավորապես ինչ տեսություններ են շրջանառվում ու դրանք ինչ ազդեցություն են ունենում հանրային տրամադրությունների վրա։
You see, with conspiracy theories, I would be quite cautious. It is a fact that Russia is spreading some conspiracy theories using its media resources, again, such as RT and Sputnik. However, in most cases, Russia prefers to amplify already existing conspiracy theories that are originating from the West itself. So what RT is doing, especially in the American context, is that it is taking genuinely American conspiracy theories and amplify their spread. they're just, they're contributing to the spreading of those conspiracy theories. It is a very rare case that Russian media, especially those international media, such as RT and Sputnik, that they themselves come up with their own conspiracy theories, like Russian-born conspiracy theories. Yet sometimes they do occur. However, some would say that those are not conspiracy theories, but just disinformation narratives, because conspiracy theory is something, really big. It involves the explanation or alternative explanation of, world affairs. But in general, and for example, one of those disinformation narratives that comes to mind is when in Germany, Russian media tried to promote a story of an underage girl who was allegedly raped by migrants or refugees, whatever, and the story turned out to be false. However, that story, and this is where we're talking about impact, this story did make a scandal. This story did make people go on streets and protest against the government allegedly trying to cover up this story. So impact, it is there, but mostly it's because Russia using these resources of propaganda and disinformation contribute to the greater visibility of those disinformation narratives and conspiracy theories.
Իսկ հետաքրքիր է, եթե ընդհանրություններից եւ տարբերություններից խոսենք մանիպուլյատիվ տեղեկատվության ռազմավարություններում եւ պատմույթներում, նարատիվներում, կարող եք նշել ընդհանրություններն ու տարբերությունները։ Դուք նաեւ ձեր խոսքում նշեցիք, որ եվրոպական ծայրահեղ աջերի եւ Ռուսաստանի համագործակցությունը հիմնականում այդ քաղաքական նարատիվ ուժեղացնելու նաեւ համար է, նաեւ եթե քաղաքական նարատիվի մասով խոսենք, ինչ նարատիվ է այս պահին, շրջանառվում, խնդրեմ։
We can, I think, distinguish between two types of those disinformation narratives or propagandistic narratives that Putin's Russia is trying to spread using its international media resources and also using the European far right. One type of those narratives are usually short-term ideas or short-term messaging. Let me give you an example. Last year, in spring, Russia was involved in two influence operations related to the COVID-19 pandemic. It provided humanitarian help to Italy and to Serbia, and it tried to show that the EU was a useless institution that did not care about either Italy, its member state, or countries that are candidates to join the European Union, such as Serbia. The idea was to discredit the European Union and show that, look, China is helping, Russia is helping those countries, but the EU or NATO, they don't do anything. That was untrue. That was false. Russia indeed sent humanitarian help to Italy. However, the EU did it first, or at least they did it earlier than the Russians did. In the case of Serbia, Serbia had help from the EU, from China, although China was probably indeed the first, but Russia came in third. So it was just a false narrative. However, they promoted this narrative also using far-right political forces to show, again, and that was to show that the EU is doing nothing related to the pandemic. So, but those are sort of, short-term messaging. However, there is also mid-term and long-term messaging. And usually this messaging, again, using the far-right, it is about ideas or arguments how entire European liberal civilization is failing, how it is degenerate, how it is, basically falling apart because of liberalism, because of multiculturalism. It is about for example, about the Eurozone falling apart. It's about how migrants are taking over the European Union. It's about how the US is trying to undermine the European Union and how it gives orders to Brussels. It's also about globalization. Russia criticizes globalization, especially the Western style or liberal globalization. So these are these mid and long-term narratives that Putin's regime is promoting using the European far right, but not only them, but also far left forces, all sorts of isolationists and conspiracy theorists.
Այդ պարագայում հետաքրքիր է ինչն է դրդում ծայրահեղաչերին թիրախավորել օրինակ Ջորջ Սորոսին եւ բաց հասարակության արժեքները, ինչու են մարդկանցից շատերը հեշտությամբ ենթարկվում այդ տեսությունների ազդեցությանը։
Yes, of course, George Soros is one or probably even the most demonized figure by authoritarian regimes, by illiberal regimes. And this is quite understandable why they hate him so much. It's because he built the Open Society Foundations that gives grants, quite generous grants, to promote the ideas of the open societies, of liberal societies across the world, but especially in Central and Eastern Europe. Of course, in some other places of the world as well, but since we are focusing on this region, I think it's important to say this. Many people believe in conspiracy theories not because they are so elaborate, not because they are smart conspiracy theories. For example, if we are talking about non-political conspiracy theories, one of those crazy theories would be the flat Earth idea, that the Earth is not round, that it is flat, in fact. And there are many people who believe in this. One explanation which I find quite most reasonable, perhaps, is that people feel disempowered. People feel weak. They look at what is going on in the world and they probably can't understand how they can make some changes in the world. And they feel totally disempowered. They believe that they can't do anything to change anything. And then they are introduced to these conspiracy theories that provide mad explanations of the world. But with those mad explanations also come an idea that there is a world government, or there are some malign forces, very powerful enemies that are to blame for those people's problems in the world, for their ills. And this gives a very comfortable feeling. It's not that I am so weak and I can't do anything. There are bigger enemies, there are greater enemies that do not let me do what I want. And this is a very comfortable feeling. It's also a very powerful feeling. So this, I believe, it's a theory that explains why so many people believe in conspiracy theories and why they find them attractive.
Այդ դեպքում հետաքրքիր է ըստ ձեզ ինչ պետք է անեն ժողովրդավարական պետությունները հասարակություններին ծայրահեղական դավադրապաշտական աճարժումների նկատմամբ, այսպես ասած, անվտանգության բարձիկներով զինելու համար։
I do believe that only in some cases, in some serious cases, governments and probably even non-government organizations should be involved in debunking disinformation or conspiracy theories. I believe what is important is to strengthen positive messaging and also create conditions that would have positive changes in societies. For example, if we agree that belief in conspiracy theories comes from the feeling of disempowerment, then governments should try to empower people. And one of the ways to do this is to involve as many people as possible in different local initiatives, in some regional projects, local projects, community projects, just to show people that maybe one person, of course, cannot change the world or the country. Maybe indeed one person can be weak compared to the state's apparatus. However, there are things that you can indeed change, starting from these community initiatives. It also brings people together and show them that despite some political differences, social differences, they can come together and they contribute to the better workings of their own small communities. This is extremely important because we live in European societies are increasingly alienated. Yeah, we live in our own information bubbles on Facebook, on Twitter. What is important is that we stop talking to people with different opinions, and then we create for ourselves these mad explanations about conspiracies that are against us. No, but if we see that we can contribute to local projects, this feeling of disempowerment will weaken, and then we will be less prone to believe, or we will be less vulnerable to those conspiracy theories and disinformation and propaganda.
Եվ այդ պարագայում ըստես հնարավոր է կանխել հասարակություն կառուցելու դեպ ուղղված այս գործընթացները ու շարժումները նոր ժողովրդավարություններում։
Yes, it is correct. Because for example, if we decide to debunk or disapprove disinformation narratives or conspiracy theories, we will be involved in this useless cycle of debunking more and more lies and more propaganda. What is important is to have our strength just not to believe in that disinformation. Let me, since we are all living in very strange conditions of constant lockdowns and quarantine, imagine a virus that is infecting many people. And we can, of course, cure those viruses, but what is important is to have sort of a vaccine, to have our bodies strongly opposed to those viruses in the first place, because viruses will be mutating, there will be more viruses. But if we have immunity is much more important than the cure for the viruses.
Պարոն Շախովցով, դուք ձեր խոսքում նշեցիք ֆինանսական հնարավոր կապերի մասին Ռուսաստանի եւ աջ ծայրահեղականների հետ, այդուհանդերձ նաև ընդգծեցիք, որ այսպես ասած ապացույցներ չկան, ինձ հետաքրքրում է հետախուզական ծառայություններ սկսել են, ուսումնասիրում են այդ հնարավոր կապերը։
Let me say that the most significant example of financial support or assistance for the far right is the example of the French far-right party, Front National. Now it's called National Rally, but until 2019 it was known as Front National or National Front. And in 2014, they received a bank loan of around 9 million euros from a Russian bank. I must say that this is a bank loan. This is not a present in a suitcase. And although they now have an opportunity to repay it in several years, so the conditions are quite good, I would say. But this is the only good example that we have about the financial support. What I know for sure that, of course, there have been investigations, or investigations are still going on, investigations by journalists, but most importantly, investigations by security services. However, so far I have not seen in public domain any results of those investigations, or there were results or negative results of the investigations. For example, in Italy, there was a scandal triggered by the leaked conversations of some functionaries or members of the far-right Lega party with their Russian contacts, and they were discussing financial support from Russia for this party. However, well, because of the scandal, there was indeed an investigation in that case, but Italian law enforcement did not find any corrupt schemes, or that they could not confirm that the Lega party indeed received any financial support from Russia.
Այս պարագայում այդուհանդերձ ինչ է Մոսկվան հենց եվրոպական ծայրահեղ աջերի համար։ Հետաքրքիր է նրանք իսկապես հավատում են, որ իրենք ինչ որ արժեքային հարաբերություններ են զարգացրել Ռուսաստանի ներկայ իշխանությունների հետ, թե պարզապես տակտիկական դաշնակից են։
Of course, there are many reasons why the European far right supports Russia. There are these tactical reasons, of course, and I think that these media platforms that Russia has and that it can provide to the European far right is one of those tactical interests of European far right parties. However, there are also the strategic views of Russia or strategic imagining of Russia. For the European far right, Russia is first and foremost a country that opposes globalization, a country that defends traditional and family values, a country that is in the West. It doesn't really matter that some of these beliefs are false. I don't see how Russia is actually supporting or defending traditional values. It's not Russian society is not a conservative society. I also can't see how Russia opposes globalization when it benefits from globalization and it contributes with its hypercapitalism to this globalization and international projects. However, it's important that the European far right believe in these ideas and how they themselves see Russia. Also, and this is important in my opinion, they feel similarity between their own ideological foundations and what Putin's regime tells them about itself or how it presents itself. So, and Putin's regime, it wants to be seen as the defender of traditional values and as the main opposition to globalization. And the European far right, which for many, many years after the Second World War were on the margins of the European societies, on the fringes of the European societies, they see that there is a huge country, essentially the largest in the world, that has an ideology, or they imagine it has an ideology that is very similar to their ideology. And then it also gives a feeling that their ideology, their far-right doctrines, they're not marginal anymore. They're not fringe anymore. They are essentially an alternative mainstream because the same ideas can be found in such a great country such as Russia. So they are, what they're talking, how they're promoting this thesis is that they are no longer on the margins. They are a new alternative mainstream. And of course, Russian media and Russian international resources are strengthening this idea that Russia is not in isolation, that Russia is the leader of an alternative, of a global alternative project. And this is an attractive model for the European far right.
Եվ ինչ են հուշում ձեր դիտարկումները 2021-ին ինչպես կարող է զարգանալ իրավիճակը եվրոպական երկրներում, Ռուսաստանում, Ուկրաինայում, ծայրահեղ աջերի եւ հակալիբերալ քարոզչության համատեքստում, ինչ նոր ռիսկեր եք տեսնում դրան։
I think that in 2021, we will largely see the continuation of Russia's actions aimed at undermining liberal democracy in the European Union. We now hear from Russian Foreign Ministry statements that quite strongly suggest that Russia even may be ready for dramatic deterioration of the relations between the EU and Russia. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov even threatened to cut ties with the European Union. And in my opinion, this, of course, will translate, at least these communications or these messages, they will translate into Russia's actions aiming to undermine the EU even further. This year will be very important because Germany will hold federal elections to the Bundestag, and Germany being one of the major leaders of the European Union is a natural target for Russian disinformation and for Russian malign influence and in general political warfare. So I'm afraid we should expect attempts of Russia to interfere in German elections, and probably we should expect that the far-right alternative for Germany will be probably the party that will benefit the most from Russian political warfare against liberal democratic Germany.
Շնորհակալ եմ, պարոն Շեխովցով։ Շնորհակալ եմ շատ հետաքրքիր հարցազրույցի համար։ Ես հիշեցնեմ, որ մեդիա կենտրոնը անցկացրեց առցանց հարցազրույց ժողովրդավարական ինտեգրացիա կենտրոնի տնօրեն, ժողովրդավարական ընտրությունների եվրոպական պլատֆորմի փորձագետ եւ Շվեդիայի միջազգային հարցերի ինստիտուտի հետազոտող Անտոն Շեխովցովի հետ Ռուսաստանը, Ուկրաինան եւ արևմտյան ծայրահեղ աջերը թեմայով։ Շնորհակալություն, հաջողություն, պարոն Շեխովցով։
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation and for having me.